So it was an event in my life. We were camping in Death Valley, and I woke up from my sleeping bag and was confronted by this incredible landscape that was a total novelty for me. In a sense, this was not unusual. After all, Death Valley was a popular tourist place. So in that sense, I was sharing it with others. But I thought it was more. I felt an identity with the desert that was totally surprising. It is what literary people call that the desert was the objective correlative of the kind of person I am.
Yi-Fu Tuan, professor of geography at the University of Minnesota. He's a companion of the Pierce County Geographical Society, and I'm told that he moonlights as a defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. Yi-Fu, I'd like to ask you if you could think out loud a little bit about your current interest in geography, the sorts of things you're reading, you're thinking about, you're writing. What would you say is your main focus of interest right now?
Well, my main focus of interest may be called humanistic geography. I'm not entirely happy with this name, but I can't very well call it human geography now because, as you know, this has been upped by Hacketry. And so by humanistic geography, I suppose I mean an explicit recognition that our ultimate interest is in the human condition. And so in this respect, we share a general interest with all the humanities.
So Ken, why don't you tell us how you know Yi-Fu?
Well, I was doing a master's in what I call Nordic philology. It was called Scandinavian Studies, but it was effectively Nordic philology. I was switched to geography in order to study with Yi-Fu, because I wanted to combine geography and literature.
And when was this?
1971.
Okay.
That's it, 1971.
Yeah. And so what were your first impressions when you met him?
I thought it was wonderful to work with somebody who had almost exactly the same interests as I, because he was switching from, at that time, from sort of natural science, from geomorphology to humanistic studies, and had this course on attitudes towards dry lands, and I was working with a heathland, which is edaphically dry and often compared to a desert. So his whole interests just fit perfectly with my own.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I remember when I first met him, so I was, I'd come from Britain and definitely knew his work already and wanted to work with him. So that was the whole point of being there.
Yeah.
But I do remember going into his office for the first time and having a sense, because I already had read so much of his work, of trepidation.
Yeah.
And, you know, as you do with a senior scholar, but also, you know, sort of admiration.
Yeah.
And just his manner was... It was welcoming, but it was also, you know, I'd never talked to anyone in the way that he spoke to you before. Yeah. It was, I had to try and figure out, because of his silences, because of how long it takes to answer a question or to respond. Yeah. It was, I'm a talkative person, and so I just fill up space. It would just be an hour of me talking and him looking up into the air and thinking. It took me ages to get used to that.
Another thing that he taught me in supervisions as a mentor is the importance of listening. And this came from his own practice, when I would, after submitting, say, a piece and he gave me feedback, I would come in to a supervision and we would talk about both my ideas, but also some of his suggestions. When I would say something, Yi-Fu would take a very, very long pause to think about it. And this was really scary, especially for a Southern Californian from a big family that we talk a lot and it's part of the social way of communicating. But I learned to wait. I would count backwards from 100. I would do other things to try to figure out how to just kind of let the time go so that he could have the time to actually think and then respond. And that actually was a form of practice. It was a form of care, and it was a form of respect. It doesn't happen that often when people really take the time to listen deeply to what you're saying. And I'm an ethnographer, as Yi-Fu would say, I'm a geoethnographer, in that I like to listen to stories emanating from place as well as the stories people talk about places. So empathetic and deep listening is really, really important to the work that I do. And I'm very grateful to my mentor, Yi-Fu, for having taught me how to do that.
I took a directed reading course with him at Wisconsin-Madison while visiting from Minnesota to help me develop my research questions for my dissertation. So I would meet him weekly at his office with impatient questions. A wonderful office, actually an awe-inspiring library of sorts. He would sit quietly and I would pose my questions one by one, pausing for his response and waiting and waiting and waiting. In the end, I would have to leave feeling very embarrassed, unsure of myself, with only a few drops of his gifts of wisdom. A few days later, as we would cross each other in the department hallway, he would stop me and say, I have been thinking about it, and then proceed to offer me his generous thoughts and bright insights into my work.
I remember as a grad student showing up at his office door unannounced, and he would never turn me away. He never said he was too busy to talk with me. And we would, in fact, have slow conversations where I would ask a question and he might think about the answer for a minute or two before responding. During those gaps in the conversation, my eye would roam around the office or look out the window. I could see Bascom Hill over his shoulder. I would look at the spines of the books on his shelves and marvel at how many books he owned, or look at the items on his desk and wonder how he decided which items to keep there, and it always seemed very carefully curated. Or I would also look at the stacks of books on his desk, which had bookmarks sticking out of them, and it was clear that he had finished reading 10 or 12 books and was in the process of bringing those into his own writing.
Ja fa anys vaig realitzar una estada postdoctoral, que comentava la Mireia, sota la seva tutela, al Departament de Geografia de la Universitat de Wisconsin, molt a prop de Chicago, als Estats Units d'Amèrica, i recordo que ell era el meu tutor i com a complement a les lectures i a les tasques que em anava encomanant i que cada setmana anàvem tractant conjuntament, em va suggerir, home, matricula't a aquest curs, vine a classe i matricula't en aquesta assignatura, una assignatura que tenia per títol, per cert, un títol molt semblant a aquell segon llibre que he citat. El títol de l'assignatura era Space and Place, a Geography of Experience. Però el que em va fascinar més va ser veure com se servia del llenguatge oral i com realment, a vegades fins i tot aquest magisteri oral era més potent que l'escrit. A l'aula no hi cabia ni una agulla, això em va sorprendre moltíssim. És a dir, els estudiants que no trobaven un seient lliure s'asseien a terra perquè no s'hi cabia més, amb l'esquena recolzada a la paret per prendre apunts d'una manera més còmoda i bastant abans de començar les classes ja estava plena. I vaig pensar, quina enveja, com veig avui algunes de les nostres, perquè la gent no volia perdre el lloc i a més no hi havia només els matriculats, sinó que venien oients. N'hi havia moltíssims i venien de tots els àmbits, òbviament de geografia, però també venien de les carreres d'arquitectura, d'urbanisme, d'art, d'història de l'art, d'antropologia, en fi, de psicologia, n'hi havia bastants de psicologia, curiosament, i així cada dia. mai va minvar l'assistència, sinó tot el contrari. I jo no me'n sabia venir no només pel que veia, sinó pel que escoltava, perquè Yi-Fu Tuan dominava, com deia, de meravella el llenguatge oral, no? Passejava, mai es quedava a la taula, passejava pels passadissos per allà on podia passar, perquè hi havia estudiants asseguts per tot, i administrava amb molta habilitat els silencis, les pauses, els tons de veu, i sempre amb un discret i molt fi i intel·ligent sentit de l'humor i molta ironia. És com si se li hagués empaltat aquesta ironia, sentit de l'humor anglesa, britànica, o ja la portava, no ho sabrem mai, però en tot cas amb una molt fina ironia que anava desgranant a mesura que anava fent la classe. Quan el llegeixes o quan l'escoltes, Tuan és d'aquells autors que flueix, és a dir, se t'escapa de les mans, com l'aigua.
His teaching was like a participation in a ritual. His lectures commanded not only presence, but communion in what it means to be part of the human world. There would not even be a whisper in class, otherwise it would not have been possible to hear him speak in his very soft, mellow voice in the auditorium of Madison, Wisconsin, filled with noisy undergraduates. His graduate seminar, on the other hand, was a rather different story. We all sat around the table, Professor Tuan at the head, and there was a happy man, eagerly waiting to share his thoughts and understandings with us, a dedicated teacher ready to open new worlds for us, a mentor committed to not letting us go unchanged through this experience. There was a somewhat long pause before he started to speak, eliciting a heavily silent anticipation from all of us before his first few words. And his laugh, a spontaneous and generous gift, studied the duration of the class. His work at first sight throughout my academic career literally flooded me with questions. I owe my PhD to him, the idea of the PhD. He helped me find the way among a multitude of research questions and weave them together into my own meaningful research goals.
Although I've done these courses over and over again, but each time it's a struggle. When I use the word struggle, I don't mean anything negative because I enjoy the struggle of putting it even clearer or in more subtle way, but still clear. And when I try to do this, I find that I often pause, so my words don't flow as a truly eloquent person. So I pause to find the right word. And the student recently came to me and said, you know, that pause of yours is a really excellent technique for getting class attention, because when you pause, he said that students were all moved to the edge of their seats, wondering whether you're going to fall off the rope, that is, whether you're ever going to find the right word. The natural sympathy, wanting me to find the right word, and when I do, there's a sigh of relief. So I said, well, no, this is not a technique. I didn't do it deliberately. It's just the way, I think that too often we encourage instantaneous response. And that, to me, is a social talk model. When we are drinking a cocktail, you can't have silence. You have to keep the conversation going. And what is said doesn't matter, really. But I feel the classroom, since we're dealing with big topics, we shouldn't follow that model. And that if you need a few minutes to think, well, why not silence? I think a pause could be pregnant. And so having emphasized that, I suppose I must have discouraged some students from just jumping in with a question.
And because when I met him, it was like 1986, so it was 16 years after you. And when you met him, he hadn't written Topophilia yet, so he wasn't a massive, well-known scholar in the discipline. And by the time I met him, sort of the heydays of humanistic geography were over. And he was this historical figure almost. I mean, he was still writing a massive amount of stuff. I think he was writing Morality and Imagination, I think, when I met him. But there was Space and Place already there, which of course is his biggest, that and Topophilia, his biggest sort of hits, as it were, in terms of citations. So a very different experience in terms of your time when you met him and my time.
And he he was popular with the architectural students and so on, but he had very few advisees.
Right.
And they would say that one of the ones who dropped out, who admired him no end, but said it was where the other advisors told you, sort of advised you what to do.
Right.
He would light candles to guide your way.
Yeah.
And that was his very self-effacing way. And he would do that, and that suited me fine because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I had from my master's the project in line. I knew exactly. So I didn't need to be told what to do. I needed the candles.
Right.
Yi-Fu was an amazing mentor, and one who worked in a interesting way, quite different from others who were also very important for me. He was not one who would give detailed copy edit feedback. He was not one to necessarily question the relationship of your empirical data on your and your theoretical underpinnings, all of which are important, and I received thankfully from other excellent mentors. Yi-Fu's style, however, was I would say it's more dialectical. I would present work. He would take these ideas, spin them a little bit differently, and look at them from a different point of view, all in the service of helping me think through in a different way what I've already worked on. And I received countless, dozens, maybe hundreds of notes over the year about the work that I did and his feedback on it. It could be very brief notes, some were longer letters. To give you an example of what this was like, let me share one with you. This is what I think he believed was important. He wrote this a dozen years after he retired, but it was so important that he put it on letterhead. And again, I'd just like to read this to you. Dear Steve, what a magnificent present. I just sent him a copy of my recently published book, Reading Magnum. I browsed through the photos and read your essays with great pleasure and benefit. Photos capture the moment, but as I look back at my own life, it is precisely the poignant moment that stays in the memory, whereas the extended presence, the long duration stretched to the point of tedium that life mostly consists of, fade. Perhaps this is why, in some ways, photos are more touching than paintings. For the latter, even if they are of the moment, such as Monk's Scream, somehow still convey, at least to me, of the enduring. Take the wonderful shot of the naked Chinese immigrant shoveling food from a bowl on the fire escape with New York City below him. I keep thinking, well, if the camera clicked a moment later, the beef noodle soup would have gone cold. Or is this just imagination run wild, as it often does with me? I'm also struck by the view from Brooklyn, New York City, September 11th, 2001. It demonstrates forcibly the common occurrence, namely, people in the same landscape, which implies they share a world, may in fact have nothing to do with one another at all. One group enjoying a picnic, the other dying in agony. Best wishes, Yi-Fu. Thank you, Yi-Fu. Best wishes, Steve.
I always found Yi-Fu a very supportive mentor and really a dependable friend. I met him quite late in life, but he was always available to give me advice, to give me suggestions, to have conversations with me. He would even write me holiday cards and letters, even as his handwriting was failing him. I think that one of the most inspiring things about Yi-Fu was that he, even before I had gone to graduate school, was always wanting to involve me and make me feel like I could have sort of deep thoughts and reflect on my life and the world around me, and to really just kind of take those what could be commonplace conversations and raise them. And I think that's a really great mark of a great teacher. And I think that in doing that, he made me feel like I was smart. He made me feel like I had something to say, to something to add to scholarly conversations. And I think that that's really, it was a great gift, and I'll always remember that.
I was Yi-Fu's official last PhD student, but to be honest, I was one of many of his students before and after I graduated. And but among his PhD students, one of the things he did was be very, very generous with his time, both in meeting with us, but also giving us feedback for our writing. And so I came to think of Yi-Fu's supervisions as a field of care. I learned, I grew, I was challenged, I was terrified often, and I became an academic, but one who also was thinking about my way of being in the world as more of a craft. Yi-Fu was very good at emphasizing the importance of writing. He would often challenge me in my earlier years as a PhD student when I would write using a lot of the theoretical kind of jargony language, and I don't like to use the word jargon, that I was enamored by. I mean, reading theory, theory is like so exciting, and you want to be part of that conversation. And one of the things that he did say is, well, to whom do you want to communicate? You really need to think about this clearly, because you can communicate to a smaller group of experts, a small group, that's perfectly fine. But if you really want to reach broader audiences and you want to talk to people outside of academia or beyond geography, you need to write very succinctly and clearly, and in a way that still remains complex. And so that was something that I learned from Yi-Fu.
I mean, supervision was an interesting thing. It was again, like you said, he didn't direct you. I mean, occasionally he would take chagrin at something I'd written. Didn't like some things I wrote, and it was a hard battle with him. To try. I had to convince him of something in clear ways, and because I was also sort of drenched in all the kinds of theory that we were excited by at the time. We were reading secretly, because no one else would teach us at Wisconsin, that postmodernism and it's a Derrida and Lyotard and Foucault, but also Ed Soja and David Harvey's latest book and all these things that weren't being taught.
Right.
We were secretly reading them and thinking, oh, this is really clever, which it was. I mean, those are all amazing things, and we would try and write like that. It was like, I'm going to write like, super theoretical stuff, not recognizing that half of what we read had been translated from French, so we weren't even reading it in the right way anyway. And Yi-Fu would gently be like, how does anyone know what you mean by this? And you would have to go back and do it again and say, okay, this is, and if you can't say what you mean, then you're just. It's the devil's. I mean, it's the emperor's new clothes, right? It's not really there. You've got to be able to say it. And he was very good at as a supervisor of getting you to. He always said, write for 1,000 educated people, not for 4 people in your committee or some imaginary people who are very clever that read post-structuralism. But you got to. I always thought I've got to give this to my parents, and they got to be able to understand it, even though they didn't go to school after 16. They should be able to understand what I'm saying. And they didn't. They're smart people. They're not smart. It's just that back then you didn't get to do that. Do you have a personal kind of fond memory of him as a person that you'd like to relate to us?
Well, I was thinking one memory I might have would be that I discovered that it was going to be his birthday and then nobody was doing it. He was living by himself, and so I took him to dinner at the Black Forest Inn, which was a German restaurant. So I ordered sauerbraten, and he ordered noodles, and he explained that noodles was good luck in China.
All right.
And that opened up sort of things. We became much more friends, I guess, at that time, because it was a more informal setting, this crazy German restaurant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember what's a similar thing is that my wife and I, and Carol was also an Yi-Fu student for her master's degree, and we invited him round to our house and made shepherd's pie and carrots. And he came around, and I don't think he'd been invited to many PhD students' houses before, and he reminded him of his Oxford, college days. I mean, I tried to make a fancy shepherd's pie. It wasn't like college dinner shepherd's pie. But then he was a very different person. He was, he laughs a lot, right? I think people realize how much he laughed. He laughed almost every sentence. It's always something he finds amusing. But he was particularly pleased, I think, and different. He wasn't advising us in any way. We were just having a nice chat, and it was great. Yeah.
I suppose my favorite memory is one time a group of us graduate students took Yi-Fu to Devil's Lake. At the time, I had a VW Westphalia, so I was driving, and a bunch of people were in the back seat, including Yi-Fu. And as we were heading out up into the mountains, it was autumn, the leaves were turning. And as we drove and the light was dappled with the beautiful color through the trees, Yi-Fu just kind of gasped, oh, he was so delighted. And it reminds me of when he wrote in his short article, Life is a Field Trip, that every day we're out there, we're experiencing the field. So it was these precious moments with Yi-Fu that I learned to really appreciate, treating everyday aspects of beauty and wonder as an important part of my life.
One of the more memorable events from when I was a grad student at University of Wisconsin was an outing to Devil's Lake near Baraboo, Wisconsin. A group of students and I decided that we'd go hike around the lake, and I let Yi-Fu know about it. I didn't think he would take me up on the offer to join us, but he was interested in doing it, and so he came out with us that day and was all outfitted and ready for a hike. And when we had lunch, we sat at a picnic table. We'd brought along a picnic lunch, and I was sitting right next to Yi-Fu, and I turned the camera and took a profile picture of him, which later University of Minnesota Press, I had submitted that picture with the manuscript for Textures of Place. They weren't interested in using it on the cover of Textures of Place, but they were interested later when they got in touch with me to use it on the cover of Space and Place.
Yi-Fu was a very important part of my family. He was a friend, and in some ways he was an adopted uncle to my brother and to me, even coming to my graduation from Oxford when no one else in the immediate family could come. When I was in New York or New Haven, whenever he would give talks in the area, we'd meet up. And I think one of my favorite moments was at one of these presentations where afterward, during the question section, somebody asked a completely unrelated question. Yi-Fu said very calmly, "Thank you. What you're saying reminds me of something else that I meant to mention." Later, when he and I talked about this, he explained that was his technique for handling off-the-wall questions.
Some people say, well, you are as much a philosopher as a geographer, or even more of one. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's true, because I've never felt comfortable, never found really great pleasure in sheer abstract philosophical thinking. I sometimes say to students or colleagues who ask in a rather facetious way that I fear becoming a philosopher and near the end of life, on my deathbed, and suddenly discovered that I know absolutely nothing because everything is questioned, and I don't think I want that. In short, I feel I still have my big questions, but I want to start with my feet firmly on the ground.
So on a more sort of, I suppose, serious note in terms of the discipline, what do you think Yi-Fu's biggest contribution to geography was?
Well, what I thought was that I was there at the height, really, of the positivistic spatial science revolution. And I think he really destabilized that revolution, that scientific revolution, more than anyone else did.
Right.
His critique of mental maps and the whole logic of it was very powerful. But what the basic problem was, as I saw it, was that they tried to subsume everything under this concept of space.
Right.
Whereas Yi-Fu always insisted on what I would call a kind of the epistemological, ontological, and cosmological contradictions between, say, space and place. So he wasn't trying to make it one all-purpose kind of thing. And so that was, I think, and that's been very important for me ever since then. But that it has also to do with the way many of his books were space and place.
Yeah, always, exactly. Most of them. Yeah.
And it has I think a Platonic dialectic to it. Plato does that.
Right.
But maybe, this is on thin ice now, but maybe there was some element of yin-yang kind of Chinese cosmology.
Right.
He didn't talk much about that, but
right.
he was very much rooted in the Chinese culture.
In his view, his work was not inspired by or based upon any kind of Eastern philosophy, but was rather growing out of Western Enlightenment, humanism, and older Western ideas about good and evil. And so he explained that and situated himself much more in a Western than an Eastern tradition. However, over the years, I've remained somewhat skeptical of that interpretation that he has of his own position. I felt and continue to feel that he brings something into Western scholarship that wasn't there before and that really bears some traces of these ideas couched in terms of yin and yang, which have to do with oppositions of mutually interdependent elements like cosmos and hearth, dominance and affection, space and place. He comes back to the idea of oppositions to structure his research, but these aren't polar opposites. These are interpenetrating opposites.
I think another important contribution of Yi-Fu's that really hasn't been fully appreciated yet are his contributions to bringing into a predominantly Eurocentric and white discipline ideas from Chinese philosophy, history, and culture, and making those comparative and building arguments out of those. I think that this was something that was really absent before he was on the scene. And I think it's also something that has really raised really interesting questions for me. I know one of the discussions he had was comparing the Temple of Heaven in Beijing and its sort of heavy wooden architecture with Gothic cathedrals and the light that they let in. And Yi-Fu would explore what this meant about religious ideas and about personal philosophies about the good life.
I believe that Yi-Fu's contributions was in providing a geophilosophical approach to trying to understand place as a center of meaning and value and experience. The experiential perspective was really, really important. I mean, I love the way that he wrote in an early essay that place is the compelling focus of a field. It is a small world, the note at which activities converge. So this is just so rich. And he also spoke about place as being rooted in the past, but oriented toward the future. So place as process, as well as a place where people come together and interact with one another. He wrote in this essay actually also that places can be a bit more outer oriented and known from the outside, like public monuments. But the one that I really think is important is this idea of place as a field of care. And this takes time, he said. It takes a while to come to know your material settings and environments really intimately and become affectionate for them and to start investing and caring for them. But equally, places include emotional attachments and feelings of belonging to the place. And some of those experiences are with other people, and sometimes it's just yourself. And at the same time, places are very social. We don't own places. And I think even now more than ever, it's really, really important to think differently about places, not as property, not as just sheer site or location, but rather in a relational perspective, which Yi-Fu actually was thinking of, that it includes responsibility for both the past, present, and future.
Però el lloc no serà l'únic concepte rehabilitat per Tuan i repescat Pels humanistes, el paisatge en serà un altre, i serà una de les grans aportacions, no només de Yi-Fu Tuan, sinó de tota aquesta escola. No? A partir d'ara, i en bona mesura gràcies a l'aportació d'aquest autor, el paisatge ja no serà només quelcom visual, sinó que serà també sonor, comencen a parlar de paisatges sonors, serà també tàctil, serà també olfactiu, és a dir, introdueixen amb força una concepció del paisatge com quelcom multisensorial, que avui dia potser ens pot semblar quelcom obvi, però en aquell moment no. I realment és una aportació rellevant, sobretot en el camp de la geografia i de les ciències del territori, perquè els geògrafs i en general totes les ciències del territori estem molt acostumats a analitzar a partir i fonamentalment del sentit de la vista i obviem la resta de sentits. I en aquest sentit, Tuan i tota aquesta escola ens van donar un toc d'atenció i va dir no, el paisatge també està composat de sons, d'olors, de superfícies, de textures. I més tard tot això, per cert, s'ha aplicat en camps com les persones amb deficiències auditives o persones cegues. S'ha aplicat moltíssim tota aquesta concepció del paisatge en el sentit ampli. No? Aquesta va ser una altra de les grans aportacions de Tuan al paisatge com quelcom multisensorial.
And another major characteristic that I think this field would stress, and it is stressed also by fields in humanities, is the ambivalent nature of so much of what we want. That is, instead of trying to tidy things up in a neat scheme, which is what we tend to do as scientists, as people in the humanities, we do not want to gloss over the ambivalences, ambiguities, and ensure the irony of the human condition.
So you're saying this really is an exceedingly subjective area. Does that bother you?
Well, it is subjective. In fact, it specifically, explicitly recognizes this element. And so in a way, I suppose humanistic geographers can turn the table around and say that we are really being objective because we recognize explicitly the subjectivity that enters in, I suppose, in all studies, maybe even in physical geography, at least in the phenomena we select to study.
He didn't, I remember his film for the AAG, his first film he did for the Geographers on Film, he said he wasn't trying to dismiss quantitative geography, right. He wasn't trying to sort of, say it had no purpose. It was just that it wasn't all the purpose. Yeah. It was like they needed to, again, like you said, two sides. There needed to be this other side for the discipline to be complete. Yeah. And I think that was a very important thing to be saying at that time. Yeah. I think that he enabled almost everyone that I circulate with now, even if they don't recognize it. And one of those was this way of writing that was completely different from even other humanistic geographers. That he wrote in a way that was invited you into a conversation, some of which you could disagree with, and to be honest, many of the graduate students he had by the time I was at Wisconsin did disagree with him about a lot of things, because we'd gone through all kinds of political things that he didn't really want to talk about or disagreed with even. But we disagreed with him, but still there was this invitation to a conversation in the writing, and it was writing that you could tell had been thoughtfully done, that didn't just comply with some kind of academic social science format how we did it. So that writing, I think, gave me permission to write in a different way from other people, and I think other cultural geographers now, we write in all kinds of different ways, and I think he started that in some ways, or was one of the people that started it. And I think the second thing that I think of in terms of my own work, and I think probably again pretty much everyone now in the broad world of cultural geography, is the things that you are allowed to use as evidence. I think that, so he clearly wrote about literature early on, and that was fine, but also, any of his books is not, you can't say that Yi-Fu was an expert on anything. Like he didn't write a book about one thing. No. It was always a huge array of examples in small little nuggets that he would use to make a bigger story about some idea, right? It was it was a little bit of Chinese city planning, a little bit of, child psychology from Piaget, a little bit of, but he was never going to write a whole book about one thing, like you did about the Jutland Heath. He wasn't ever going to do that.
When I did field work, as a geomorphologist, I would look at rocks and rock formation, and often I feel a little frustrated. I said, well, I wish the rock can give me an answer. I mean, I wish you tell me something.
Talk to me, right?
Talk to me. Yes, it's just dumped there. And I have no privileged access to the internal psyche of the rock, so to speak. That's why I felt that, and this is really intuition more than anything else, and partly temperament. I felt this area of very human geography is something that I am privileged. All humans are privileged because we are human. I mean, you can ask another human, and there's this abundant evidence of literature, which from novels to histories to poetry, which articulate often some of our deepest feelings and aspirations. And I have them too. So in that sense, I feel I have a privileged access to information. And it is this that provided me with a feeling of, as it were, psychological certainty. It's not that I feel that in human geography you have the answers. Answers are even more remote. But there's a psychological certainty that I'm one of the subject. I ask the question, but I'm also being studied because, I'm human.
He did a lot of groundwork. I mean, he explained to us what phenomenology was. He wrote articles about that. Yeah. He explained what structuralism was in a very simple way. Yeah. It wasn't that he wanted us all to be phenomenologists or structuralists, but he showed that there are people doing serious work in other fields based on this kind of thing. So on that basis, you could do some of those things.
But it was enough for him to simply say that phenomenology is a way of allowing us to think about experience, and geographers hadn't been writing about human experience, and that was just strange to him. Whereas for somebody else, perhaps like David Seaman or someone, or even Ted Ralph, you really had to sort of get into the guts of Husserl and Brentano and Heidegger and understand their footnotes and the convolutions, and you wouldn't ever get Yi-Fu writing more than a few paragraphs about another person in that way. He wouldn't say, no, phenomenology is not that, it's really this, or the late Merleau-Ponty was better than the early Heidegger, or that kind. He just wasn't interested.
Well, your 76 paper was widely read in humanistic geography, but we find that expression drops out after a while. How do you explain that?
Yes, I've tended to avoid using it, and a reason is that I felt that for a time this expression had been used for defining human geography in too narrow a way. It became rather too narrowly literary. So humanistic geography might be, say, take the works of Faulkner or any great author and do a study analysis of that. And that's humanistic geography. Well, it is humanistic geography. But if I use that title, then I feel that I would be identified with this, and I didn't want to limit myself to just the literary sources or to the works of great thinkers like Heidegger. If you study Heidegger and his notions of home or at-homeness, write a paper, then that would be humanistic geography. But then that would also be confining myself to the thinkings of a great thinker, and I want to move into the common humanity and not just people who happens to be able to articulate.
But he, with his enormous intelligence, was able to understand and grasp these different fields. But then he tried to make a synthesis, to put them together in easy ways that we could grasp. Maybe not the least architects and so on who are involved in putting together all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, I mean his reputation outside of geography in different disciplines is huge. You just meet random people and you say Yi-Fu Tuan was your supervisor and their eyes light up. It's like, really? Yi-Fu Tuan? In religious studies and literature and architecture, all over the place.
He once said that he wished he'd never written Topophilia.
Right.
And but he wrote Space and Place shortly thereafter. And I think that the problem was that he became Mr. Place.
Right.
Mr. Warm and cuddly, place sensibility. And so that enabled the positivists to say, well, we know all about what's really going on in the world, but then people have to relate to it, so then you get Yi-Fu to come in. And so actually there was an anthology of his work, of geography, the important things in geography, where they anthologized some British geographies, anthologized space and place, and took out space.
Yes. It's like he didn't write about space.
No, they took it out. They just took it out of the manuscript and printed it without space. And so he was cubbyholed, and he didn't like that because it was the two contrasting things that was important.
A favorite Yi-Fu quote that resonates with me and informs what I do. I really have always used and found incredibly helpful Yi-Fu's definition of geography. Quote, "The study of the earth as the home of people," 1991. So when you start thinking about that, what does that mean to think about, say, the earth as our home? And what does it mean when you have many homes? I myself have had many homes just like Yi-Fu, and I'm hoping that when I pay attention to healthy and self-aware and respectful forms of placemaking with others, that there might be the possibilities of creating more just places to live together with others. And the other thing, when I hear the word people, I also think not just of humans, but I'm thinking of an extended version that American Indians might use. That I am blown away by the fact that I've been reading a lot of indigenous theorists, many of whom are, I would say, feminist and activists. And when they talk about the importance of land relations, they also talk about the importance of place and the importance of human relationships to the world and to ecologies and other life forms. But they also consider people to be landforms and bodies of water, certain animals. And they draw upon Yi-Fu when defining an indigenous understanding of place.
I don't have one favorite book, but I would mention, because there's a kind of galaxy, but one would have been the hydrologic cycle, another would have been Man and Nature, a little pamphlet.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. I didn't even read it.
From the that the AAG published. And Man and Nature was my theme. And I think that this is something that maybe got lost with Yi-Fu. I don't think he did much Man and Nature kind of thing at Wisconsin. But that was what drove me, and what makes maybe my work a bit different from later generations.
So I really did like Passing Strange and Wonderful, because I thought he always said he didn't want to write about aesthetics. I'm not sure why he didn't want to write about it, but that's how he started. It's like I didn't never been interested in writing about aesthetics.
Plato could have convinced him.
And I just remember him writing about how, this plastic thing, I think it was like a gutter or a pipe. He says this pipe, and it's just a grey plastic pipe. But at the end of it, there's this little ridge that goes around it. But someone has decided that this gutter needs this ridge, and it has no function whatsoever. And it's the cheapest bit of plastic pipe you could possibly imagine. But somehow or other, we think we need this little ridge that goes around the side. Just because. But so there's this idea that the aesthetic is part of how we are in the world, and that seems to be in the centre of all his books, is how we are in the world. And the aesthetic impulse seems so strong and really interesting, and I think that book is a really subtle and interesting way of thinking about that. And I can see why he, doesn't want everyone to always be reading Topophilia, Space and Place, because he's done all this other stuff. He did all these other things since then.
Yi-Fu has a lot of really intriguing, creative ideas across a range of manuscripts. One that I really like is Dominance and Affection, The Making of Pets. And I think that this is a book in which Yi-Fu explores how humans manipulate a range of environments and also things, ranging from gardens to water fountains to even the selective breeding of different types of animals, and how in people's pursuit of beauty and control, there's really a dark lining. And I think that this is something that I thought was really intriguing, but also quite unsettling, because it really changes the way I look at just everyday objects. So, Yi-Fu was looking at how there's, in pursuing a lot of the sort of furniture of the good life, there's a lot of, there's violence, there's an impulse to control, And that I think that this really kind of raises big questions of, in our pursuit of pleasure, in our pursuit of things that seem to bring joy and contentment, there's a lot of violence.
I have many favorite Yi-Fu books, and the two probably that inspired me the most have been Topophilia and Space and Place. My favorite title, Landscapes of Fear, but I think the one that I like the best, Segmented Worlds and Self. I love the historical approach, the comparative approach, and just thinking about how family life and community life was architecturally and physically and socially structured. It was just so fascinating. And it was a way that I actually really came to really understood the complexities of spatiality, that back and forth between the social and the spatial from an experiential perspective.
Speak to humanity sounds portentous, as perhaps also when we speak of ourselves as human beings rather than as Chinese, American, or Navajo. A human being addresses other human beings. An I addresses other I's, irrespective of their skin color or cultural baggage. This is the posture of a cosmopolite. And by that word, I mean not the superficial man of the world, proud of his smattering of languages, his equal appreciation of sushi and bouillabaisse, but one who takes the wide world, blemishes notwithstanding, in awestruck wonder. Surprising as it may seem, we all have it in us to be such individuals. We are all naturally disposed to be cosmopolites.
Here are a few reflections I have about Yi-Fu Tuan, in particular about the later stages of his life. Well, I first became aware of his ideas via undergraduate courses at UBC in the early 1980s. Thanks to David Lay and others, my engagement with him was highly personal and only began during his retirement years, from 2001 on, when I first met him, actually, and I had moved from Singapore. And we formed a friendship that lasted right until the end of his life on Earth at 91 plus years old. He remained intellectually active, but drew in and engaged with undergraduate students via meetings over coffee, lunches, etc. He loved meeting them in Memorial Union's Lakeside Cafe, a regular haunt just a few minutes' walk from his retirement office in Science Hall. And this is actually the setting for the photo on his website if you've ever visited it. Gradually, for a range of reasons, Yi-Fu liked to meet students and a few faculty at a downtown Starbucks right beside campus. This was a suitable place for him to observe and people watch, to listen and eavesdrop on undergraduates who were studying calculus and history and wrestling with answers to the challenges that their professors and their TAs posed them. The downtown of Madison, Wisconsin was the anchor zone for his personal engagements. He reveled in this relatively dense, for North America, university town's micro-geographies. It's a classic town-gown relationship in many ways, which at times can be claustrophobic, but was yet for him, I think, highly facilitative for somebody who liked to walk, think, and live the so-called life of the mind. A cliched phrase, to be sure, but an apt one in his case. Yi-Fu, when he was relatively healthy and mobile, also would visit Science Hall and listen to speakers in the aptly named Yi-Fu Tuan seminar series and ask what Peter Haggett once deemed behind the stump questions that were very difficult to respond to, and raised both all sorts of eyebrows, but also laughter and insights as well. Yi-Fu would exit Science Hall and go and meet faculty, friends, students, etc. at the Sunroom Cafe as well on nearby State Street. And in many ways, despite all of this engagement, he was a lonely soul, right? Though in many ways I would say as well that this, I think, drove him to engage with people to discuss an amazing array of topics and issues, from the intimate to the personal to the global. As Yi-Fu aged, he gradually had to spend more and more time in his downtown Madison retirement complex, although he arranged for people to meet him for coffee and tea and lunches in the complex, where he continued listening, sharing, engaging, smiling, and laughing. While correspondence and much praise regularly came in from all over the world via email and the post and his iPad and his computer, while he was ultimately in love with the Death Valley landscapes, it was this local nature of life in a small town, Midwestern college town called in the state that is deemed America's Dairyland that facilitated the personal engagement that helped sustain him until he passed away at 91 plus years. Yi-Fu was a kind and generous person until he passed, always curious, with a unique laugh and a sparkle in his eye. I was so lucky to have been able to regularly engage with him and become his friend after his former academic career ended.
So do you have really anything to add in relationship to this point that no two people or persons see the same reality? There are different perspectives?
There's an exception to it. At the two ends of life, I think all infants probably relate to the world the same way. And likewise, people like me, extreme old age. How so? Because all the differences that are the result of the senses have diminished. What I mean is that my sense of taste, sense of hearing, and eyesight all seem to become fuzzy. It has lost its keenness that used to separate people. One thing that remains, however, and is the last thing that I hang on to, is curiously the abstract. What I've just said to you is something I've learned in extreme old age, when all the senses that give me reality have faded.